4ZZZ cares about our listeners and our environment.
4ZZZ. Eco Roundup.
Radical Radio Collective.
4ZZZ.
Good afternoon, 4ZZZ listeners. You're tuned into Eco Radio, Australia's longest running peace and environment radio show. Definitely.
Almost at 50 years.
Almost at 50 years,
Less
yeah.
than
1 year behind 4ZZZ as a station. That's pretty incredible.
6 months until we're 50.
Yeah. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
I don't feel 50.
No, I don't either. I wasn't alive then, so I suppose I wouldn't.
Okay. We're taking over your middle of the day, middle of the week, middle of the month airwaves.
Smack in the middle.
Yeah, almost bang smack. My name is Dave. My pronouns are he, him.
My name is Zack. My pronouns are he, they.
And I want to start off by acknowledging and paying my respects to the custodians on the country in which we broadcast. We're located in the city Mungingin on Turrbal Yogi Yugambeh land. I also want to acknowledge and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are listening in today. Our radio waves reach Cubby Cubby and Jinnabara country in the north, Waka Waka country in the west. In the east, we pay our respects to the Quandamooka people, and down south we reach the Commermary, Nigaragwal, Munjali, Wandjarabara and Yugambeh countries. Thank you to No Idea for all the great ideas. I love a little cuttlefish story. The cute little things that swim through the water in that really weird wave-like fashion.
Propulse.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Yeah, I take umbrage with two things that occurred on No Idea today.
Okay.
First and foremost, I don't like chimpanzees, so hearing them holler and hoot and bang things over the
Not for you?
Not for me. They scare me.
Okay.
I think they're one of the actual animals that, other than like us, that can be cruel and malicious.
Dolphins.
Yeah, dolphins too, but they don't have the capacity to rip you limb from limb.
I think dogs can be cruel as well. I've seen dogs bully other dogs.
Cats, yeah.
Cats. Well, yeah, cats have bullied me before.
Yeah, they play with their food and stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
The second one was earlier in the program. No Idea came out as a staunch anti-freshwater hater.
Right.
Yeah, we love the ocean on No Idea. Freshwater, it's no good. I take the opposite stance. There's too much ocean.
Not enough fresh water.
Not enough fresh water. I dislike the ocean for the same reason I dislike space. There's too much of it, and there's not enough things in it, and that scares me.
Yeah, that is a scary thought.
Also, freshwater biomes they're just cool, man. I don't know what to tell you.
They are very cool. I love going for a dip in a freshwater stream or creek.
I love wading in thigh-high water in a creek at night. It's good. You can have a non marine things in creeks as well. You get a racali in it. It's that's cool. That lives on land and the ocean. And land and not the ocean. Land and the water. And,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Frogs.
Do they have insects in the ocean, or are they just lakes and creeks? I think there
were the last thing I remember reading was 6 to 8 species of insect capable of living in the ocean.
Saltwater.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot that have taken to saltwater. It's just a very unfriendly environment to non-ocean dwelling species.
Yeah, right.
Obviously.
Wow. This is a great way to transition back into what we're going to be talking about today, because we're going to be talking a bit about offshore wind farms.
Oh.
So today on the show we are talking with Ben Smee. Ben is a journalist from The Guardian, and we're going to be talking about how climate change deniers are pivoting away from denying climate change, and instead they're focusing on destroying renewable energy.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he wrote an article last month with Graham Reedfern, and I want to talk to him a bit more about it, because I found it was not a lot of people are talking about how there's a huge push for anti-renewables at the moment, and I'm seeing that pop up a lot. all over the media.
Well, it was very prominent in the LNP's campaign, wasn't it? With
I mean, but it always is. I'm seeing a lot of what look like grassroots campaigns, but according to this article, they might not be.
Interesting.
So we're going to talk to Ben Smee a little bit later. But first, let's play a song. This is Black Country New Road with Nancy Tries to Take the Night. You're listening to 4ZZZ. This is Eco Radio. Right now we have on the line Ben Smee. Ben is a Walkley Award-winning journalist and Guardian Australia's Queensland correspondent. Ben wrote an article recently with Graham Reedford looking into how climate change denying groups are changing their focus from climate change to being against renewable technologies. Ben, thank you very much for joining us.
No problems.
So could you start off by telling us how this article came about?
Yeah, well, I think it's a follow-on from an earlier piece we did. We during the election, we were sort of having a look at some of the comments and statements made by some of the coalition MPs and candidates who had sort of been previously on record being opposed to net zero commitments, being quite supportive of keeping coal mines and coal-fired power stations open. Mm-hmm. We came across some comments that Colin Boyce, who's the member for Flynn, had made to a group which had some pretty significant links to the old school climate denial movement. Sort of made comments. Some of the comments that he said at the time were along the lines that that we should let Rome burn for a bit. I guess implying that, the way that that climate deniers and those opposed to action on climate change could end up winning the argument might be to encourage power blackouts to happen and people to lose power. So sort of became a bit of a story during the middle of the election campaign. And one of the things we did sort of following on from that meeting was really kind of then start to look at the links between these sorts of climate denial groups and people who've been active and kind of vocal in that space over a number of years, decades even.
Yep.
And this newer phenomenon of people who are opposed to renewable energy developments. And what we saw, particularly in the context of the election campaign, in a lot of places, we saw people not necessarily talking about opposition to net zero or kind of scepticism around climate change, but what we saw was that there was this push against renewable developments, and that those were often framed on kind of environmental grounds, sometimes on kind of social grounds, but that, I think when you really dig deep into some of those sorts of campaigns and movements, you really did see a lot of the links between that kind of old climate denial movement kind of really starting to crop up. So I guess the genesis of the piece was as much kind of really starting to kind of detail some of those links and essentially show that there were a lot of people who, were real old school climate deniers behind this kind of more modern anti-renewables push.
Yeah, so you detailed some of those groups, and I found it really interesting that there are these like background groups like the Saltbush Club that don't really have a public side. Can you tell me about these groups and how they get their messages out to the public?
Yeah, I think the group, the Saltbush Club is a particularly prominent example. There's a number of reasonably high-profile, prominent people who sort of put their name to join this group, which essentially at its purpose is kind of denial of climate science. And there's this, I guess, probably best to describe it as an ecosystem of groups who sort of, really kind of come together and talk about the same things. We go back kind of a bit more than a decade when these groups were sort of involved in bringing Lord Monckton out here to speak and to kind of tour around raising questions about consensus climate science. So in a lot of ways, these groups, I think, are not necessarily completely formalised in terms of, being the sort of thing that an everyday member of the public could sort of pay a membership fee and join and then turn up to some meetings. But in terms of in terms of kind of an ecosystem of people and, you know, relatively prominent people, they certainly do meet. They certainly do coordinate on things like campaigns that are designed to, you know, really kind of go against that scientific consensus with regard to climate change. And I think one of the things that our piece kind of was able to show is that, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, those groups really did pivot to talking about energy as much as climate, because I think that there was a realisation that, you know, the broader public believed that climate change was real, believed in the consensus science around climate change, and that was really a, you know, a non-starter in terms of trying to, you know, put their argument. I think an acceptance that they'd possibly lost that argument, but that what they did is pivoted to talking about energy. And I think that when, you know, it's really clear that what their tactics had become was to try and talk to people in kind of hip pocket terms around and oppose the energy transition, when, you know, what they were really obviously trying to do was to kind of push that old school climate science denial.
Yeah, so some of the things I've seen from just the election, but also more broadly, are that, we don't have the infrastructure for renewable energies, and things that really put fossil fuels as we need to stick with these because, you know, this is what we've planned for. What, from your research into these groups, has there been anything that surprised you with the links of people or some of the people that have shown up?
No, I mean, look, I think it's, I think largely it's unsurprising a lot of the people behind it, but I think one of the things that they've attempted to do is kind of co-opt the environment movement or elements of the environment movement in this kind of idea of pushing against renewables. And a lot of the arguments that are being made, you know, one particular kind of campaign that we wrote about was around Richmond in northern New South Wales. It's a very eco-conscious federal electorate, one that's been held by the Nationals in the past, but that ultimately is now becoming a contest between the Greens and Labor. And the Nationals candidate there was pushing really quite environmentally heavy messaging to people, saying that, you know, transition lines, solar farms, wind farms were environmentally destructive.
Yeah.
And I think it's just sort of the co-option of some elements of the environment movement that I think is quite interesting here. You know, there are certainly people who you might not necessarily expect, given what we know about the climate change and we know about the kind of the importance of the energy transition. There are certain people you might not expect to kind of be involved in these sorts of campaigns, but who are there and who are raising concerns about the environmental impact of renewables. Now, I think we should be really careful not to suggest that renewables have no environmental impact.
Yeah.
And I know there are environmental groups that, you know, that want us to be cautious about how we develop renewable projects and the fact that we develop them in the most appropriate areas. But there's a real hypocrisy here when it comes to some of these anti-renewable campaigns. We're talking about people who've made a lifetime out of campaigning against the idea of red and green tape when it comes to coal mine approvals. And we're talking about some communities that have had no problem with having coal mines on their doorstep. And, you know, the environmental impact of those compared to a renewables project, you know, it's really not even a comparison at all.
Yeah.
And yet these are the same people who are saying, okay, well, now we need to put a brake on approval processes for renewables because of the environmental or community impact of those. And we've just seen that bite a little bit here in Queensland when it comes to some recent moves of the state government. The state government's just changed some of its planning regulations that mean that large-scale renewable projects have to go through more stringent environmental approval processes. Now, that's not necessarily something that on face value is a bad thing. Obviously, need to be really cautious when we're developing anything to make sure that there's no big impact on the environment. But when you look and think that there are some coal mine developments that have to go through less stringent approval processes than some renewable projects, I think you do start to see that there's an ideology kind of seeping through here in a kind of a political environment where we've sort of, you know, the arguments about is climate change real and do we need to act on it have been run and won. You know, the Nationals now notionally support a net zero policy, but we kind of are seeing this sort of Trojan horse of that argument trying to kind of continue in some way in this opposition to renewables.
Yeah, so have you been able to link any of these anti-renewable groups, or maybe some of the groups that are saying save this environment from this renewable energy infrastructure, to any of the Saltbush Club or any of the larger lobbying groups?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there are very clear links between some of those campaigns and, people who promote climate science denial. Like, I mean, I think in one instance there were, a particular person who has been running and organising kind of, very broad scale anti-renewable campaigns, has, had a podcast where he's interviewed Ian Plimer, who's obviously a very, very prominent person within the movement that questions consensus climate science. Mm-hmm. Those you really don't need to look too deep beneath the surface to really find that there are people who have long-standing kind of positions that have sought to deny climate change, who are now pushing anti-renewable arguments. And I mean, one very strong example was someone who was a founding member and quite prominent in the Saltbush Club, someone who's been quite prominent within the kind of climate denial ecosystem, even posted on a private blog about the fact that was a tactic that they had used, which was to pivot towards speaking about energy and opposing renewables, as opposed necessarily to speaking about climate change. So there's very substantial links, and that's again not to say that everyone involved in the anti-renewables movement is a climate science denier, but we also were able to show that there are some groups, some old school kind of skeptic groups that are kind of trying to put together broader networks of people, which include people from the sort of the COVID era freedom movement, that include people who are members of kind of some of the more wacko climate skeptic Facebook groups, sort of all kind of coalescing together. So there's certainly some level of strategy behind the linking of this anti-renewable movement and the involvement in some of these kind of older climate skeptics within that movement. But again, that's certainly not to say that, everyone, there are certainly members of the anti-renewable movement too who, for whatever reasons have come to it without necessarily having been a climate skeptic prior. Yeah. But certainly there are absolutely links between the sorts of folks who are seeking to kind of deny and undermine climate science over the last few decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Ben. I really appreciate your insight into this, and I look forward to the article moving on to another phase that I can follow.
Yeah, absolutely. No, certainly something that we have a keen interest in at The Guardian is following, how these sorts of campaigns move and are shaped. So certainly be continuing to look at it.
That's great. Okay, thanks very much, Ben Smee.
Thank you.
That was Ben Smee, Walkley Award-winning journalist and Guardian Australia's Queensland correspondent. Let's go to now a song that Ben requested. This is Guided by Voices with their song Everybody Thinks I'm a Rain Cloud. You're listening to 4ZZZ. This is Eco Radio.
You're listening to Eco Radio, the radio of the future.
You are listening to Eco Radio, the radio of the future. Thank you, small child. We've still got it, Dave. Even with last week off, we can still do the same monotone voice and remember all the words.
Absolutely. It's my bread and butter.
Oh, I love it. It's my favourite part of the show each week.
We just heard then from Guided by Voices with their song Everybody Thinks I'm a Rain Cloud, in parentheses, when I'm not looking. And the Blankets with Wide Brown Land. We had that conversation with Ben Smee about climate change denying groups becoming or pivoting to becoming anti-renewable groups. And we saw it in the election where press conferences, it was like the only time climate change was even discussed a bit. Seemed to be when press conferences were interrupted by people claiming that wind turbines kill whales. Yeah, just these outlandish statements, which you actually had to look into, Zach.
Somewhat.
Yeah, and you said that the groups will often quote other groups that are anti-renewables, and they'll use them as like authorities.
Yeah, this was. Can I say group names or?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this was Advance Australia, and they quoted a anti-wind turbine group in the UK, which they said that these whales may have died to wind turbines, and there was some guy at the scene who was like, "Oh, that was one of the two options that could have killed them." They didn't have any like specialists on or anything. They were just like, "Here's this guy. Here's what he thinks." And then as well in the same article, it then links itself to another page in the article, another article that it itself wrote.
Yeah,
it's like, we got Ouroboros out here.
yeah, that's right. The snake eating itself, the climate denier shoving its foot into its mouth.
It's instead of licking something else's boot, it's licking its own.
Yeah, it's licking its own boot. That's very funny. So I thought that was a really interesting discussion we had with Ben. However, Max texted us in, Max from No Idea, and he said, I thought Zack doesn't do the ocean.
I don't. I would be. I'm not the biggest fan of whales. I don't think they deserve to be like killed or anything like that.
No,
of course not. But I would much prefer them if there was like a freshwater whale rather than like a saltwater.
They have Amazonian dolphins.
That's close enough.
That's
yeah.
pretty close.
I know they're
pink as well, which is cool.
Yeah. So that's called like the boto in like the native language there, in the language there. And there's actually a bit of a not a stigma, but there's a myth about them that at night the boto will turn into a person, and to cover its blowhole it will wear a top hat, and that is used to explain unexplained pregnancies of local women.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so if you ever see a man walking around with a top hat on...
In the Amazon?
Just in general.
Oh, just in general, if anyone's got a top hat,
yeah,
unexplained pregnancies are happening.
Yeah, they're suspicious.
That's disturbing to think about.
Yeah, they are kind of freaky looking dolphins too.
Yeah.
They're very gangly. They're not... Yeah. They're not a great animal to look at.
We talked about a couple of weeks ago about pets that you can subscribe to 4ZZZ that are not usual pets. I've had people come up to me and say that was a really great social media post that Liz Witt made, and I agree, it was very funny. So I'm thinking maybe non-pet to subscribe would be those boto dolphins.
Well, would they count as a pet? If they turned into a person? That's just a regular subscription then, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have to go to the rule book about that one.
Yeah. Well, I suppose if they're under 18, they can still subscribe for $25. But if they're above 18, they're not classified as an under 18-year-old or a pet, in which case they either have to pay $80 for a full subscription or $140 if they're a super passionate boto. Or go the whole way, $500 for a super sub, and you get some cool prizes with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And bands can subscribe. We actually had a band subscriber just text us in asking if we can play their new single. I'm going to oblige because I think it's a nice thing to do, and I'm feeling generous.
Is that the name of the song?
What?
I'm going to oblige.
No. No, the song is actually Love at the End of the Line by Kathleen Turner Overdrive. You're listening to 4ZZZ. This is Eco Radio. Welcome back. You're on 4ZZZ Eco Radio. We just heard then from Blue Stockings with The Fool, and before that was Kathleen Turner Overdrive with Love at the End of the Line. We were talking about renewable energy and climate change deniers taking a pivot to anti-renewable energy. But Stacey texted in and made an interesting point. Renewables just allow humanity to continue extraction and land exploitation. Isn't it destructive hyper-tech living? And I've got to agree somewhat with Stacey. I used to be an anarcho-primitivist. Like, I read John Zerzan and this sort of intellectual primitive living idea. And then my appendix erupted. And I didn't think about anything else. I was like, just make this pain go away, get me to a hospital, sort this out. And I think there's a way that we can balance living sustainably with having also, modern technologies. However, I think, Stacey's right that it does continue this need to extract or take from the land without necessarily giving back. But we could balance that out with better ecological outcomes, I think.
I agree with you completely. I've thought about this before as well, where if we were to go back to a primitive a more primitive way of living, how do we support those who have disability, for example? Like, I have a friend who has POTS and Hashimoto's disease.
Okay, I don't know those.
So POTS is where your heart rate increases when you stand up. Hashimoto's disease is where the body starts attacking the thyroid gland.
Okay.
But she has a lot of medical issues and should be screwed if air conditioning didn't exist.
Yeah.
It's like there needs to be some kind of way of connecting those two ideas together, where we are still living in a much more ecosystem friendly way, where we're not completely exploiting the land, but then also we are providing medical benefits and improvements for those that need them. There needs to be some compromise between not exploiting the land completely and human health and happiness.
Yeah. I think that we should be looking for the cleanest way possible to live, while also looking after each other. We do go to excess. We have gone to excess, in Australia, but in the West, in the global North, or whatever they want to call it, and we consume a heap more than we should.
Yeah.
Watching whatever the new hot show is on your streaming service while your AI writes your next article or whatever, so there are things that we should be doing to take away that excess, but I don't think that just being anti-renewable is the way to go. I think that we can have a balance there.
Yeah.
One of the things we can do to be more in touch with the earth and help not consume but give back is what I like to call the Bushcare Roundup.
It's a Bushcare Roundup. They've been pulling out weeds and then they put in trees. It's the Bushcare Roundup.
And these are some of the things that you can do in your community this week by giving back to Mother Earth. Friday the 16th at 3 o'clock, you can go to the Growing Forward Kurillpa Common Working Bee. That's at 250 Boundary Street in West End. On Saturday the 17th, this is a good one actually, at 8 o'clock in the morning, you can go to Ocean Crusaders Brisbane River Cleanup. You need to book in advance, but they're meeting at the boat ramp at Meiers Road in Indooroopilly.
Do get onto that one promptly, because from what I know, those sessions fill out rather quickly.
Yeah.
On Sunday the 18th from 8 till 10 a.m. there's the Friends of Whites Hill Reserve Bushcare, and that one is obviously at Whites Hill Reserve. Then from 8 till 1 there is the Ocean Crusaders Brisbane River Cleanup, and that one again taking place at Boat Ramp, Meiers Road and Indooroopilly. From 8 till 10 there is the N4C Stevens Mountain Working Bee. That one's at Pear Street and Greenslopes. Then from 8:30 till 10:30 a.m. there is a Slacks Creek Catchment Group Working Bee. That one is at Riverdale Park, Meadowbrook. From 2 till 5, yes, 2 till 5 p.m. I can read 24-hour time. There is the Armwood Place Bushcare Working Bee at Eckerman Park South in Annerley. And then from 2:30 till 4:30 there is the Moolabin Rewilding, and that one is at Maruka Lines Bicentennial Picnic Ground, Indooroopilly.
Yeah, all right. And that's the Bushcare Roundup. We are getting a few texts in that, into more the primitivist ideas, and we would love to have a longer conversation about this. Maybe I'll look into it for another episode, but we've got to send you off to the wonderful whimsy of Jordan on Sonic Aliens, who's talking to DVD today. So stick around for that, and after Sonic Aliens it's Goo. Fantastic Wednesday lineup for you. You're listening to 4ZZZ. This has been Eco Radio.